Hi everybody, Janie Lantz here, and I want to welcome you to the Facebook Live today. My topic for today's Facebook Live is inset lace in the hoop. And I have in the background Amy, who is doing all the technical stuff. She will take care of any questions that you guys ask and make sure I can give you any answers that you need. And we always like to remind you not to click on outside links if somebody else is posting in the chat group. We're never going to ask you for payment. Facebook Lives are always free. And we don't want you to link to somebody that might give you a virus or spam you. So, designing lace set into fabric. And I'm just going to show you very quickly here before we start. This is my big butterfly. And if you look over my shoulder, you'll see a jacket where it's a linen jacket that's been worn and washed quite a few times. And I stitched this butterfly on the back of this jacket as well and washed out all the excess stabilizer. And I made this a really tight lace so it would be like fabric so it could stand up to the wear and tear of that jacket. But what we're going to discuss today in the Facebook Live is how you can design your own freestanding laces, but instead of freestanding, we're going to go through the process required or needed to set them into fabric, make them secure so they won't pull out when you cut out the center. And I have set up my instructions to show you how to do this using Cutwork needles. So with our branded sewing and embroidery machines from SVP Worldwide, many of them are capable of using Cutwork needles. And when you create things in my sewing and embroidery, they'll add that code right to the design as well. So I think without further ado, I'm going to switch over to my software window. Thank you, Amy. And we are going to talk through the steps of creating inset lace. So the place you would do this
Janie,
is...
before you start, will you hit the little hide button on that little thing, just so that it's not showing up on the...
Yep.
Makes it easier to see. Thank you.
You bet. You're welcome. So I was just telling Amy that my presentations are far enough apart in physical weeks that I tend to forget the routine until we go through it again. So thank you guys for putting up with us. So to design lace, you need the digitizing software. And the digitizing software is part of the full package, which is now called Elite in the CREATIVATE software window. So you need the Elite package so that you have digitizing software. I would open my digitizing window and I'm just going to click new and show you. In Windows, it comes up with the Express Design Wizard. In Mac, it does not. So in Windows, I just go ahead and click cancel and close out that window. And I like to preset my hoop size right here because I know about a target hoop size that I want to use. And for this one, I used a 200 by 200 millimeter. So I could create an embroidery that size or a bit smaller. And why I do that is because to go to Draw and Paint and bring in artwork, you need to set your hoop size before you go to Draw and Paint and create the art. If you change the canvas size, which is preset by the hoop size, if you change canvas and Draw and Paint, once you link to it, it messes with the code somehow and corrupts the artwork or corrupts the embroidery design. So you never, when you have linked to Draw and Paint, want to change canvas size there. So do your hoop size first, and then we're going to go to the View tab and edit background, or if you're in Mac, it's right up there in the main toolbar. And it links me into Draw and Paint as a quick link. If you look down at the bottom, you'll see that my digitizing window is still open and I am just linked to the Draw and Paint. And I am going to use the Insert tab because we have some artwork already in here. And I think if you guys want to watch the video and try and make lace like this on your own, it's easier when the artwork is already there. But you can use any type of artwork that you can bring in and use to digitize in the embroidery software window. So you can use outside artwork as well. I'm going to go to the design gallery. And in the design gallery, once that opens up, you have a whole list of artwork that has been pre-drawn and installed within the software. And I'm going to use from Bugs and Insects this little butterfly. So you may see that that shape that I showed you the lace in my sample is this shape. So I'm going to select that butterfly and then use open. And then that brings one in. So then we close this window. And if I hold Control and Shift or Command and Shift, then I can make this as large or small as I want it to be. Now, there is another way to adjust the size of artwork in Draw and Paint. In the Draw tab, you have Transform, or in the Insert tab, you have Transform. And in Transform, you can lock this proportionally and make this an exact size. So I'm going to make this one 175 millimeters, and it adjusted the other dimension. I did width, it adjusted height for me automatically, and set that. So you could actually make this artwork so that your design would target a very specific size. So I'm going to go ahead and close Transform. And now I have artwork, but this artwork is outlines and fills. And I really don't need that for making the lace. So this is how I set it up. Went to the film strip, clicked the little plus sign. It shows me that the butterfly is made up of a bunch of grouped objects. So I click the little plus sign again. And now you can see all these individual little pathways here are sections of what I call fill. It's like, like color, like you colored it in. And then at the very bottom, you can see there is a path that is the lines that define the outlines of the butterfly. I don't need all these fill objects, so I'm just going to click one at either the top or the bottom, scroll to the other end, hold the Shift key and click the other one. And those are all selected. And then I can just simply delete them with my keyboard key. And now I'm just with a line drawing, which is exactly what I need. But I'm going to use quick tools for this. Now, those of you out there, and I know there are quite a few who follow these Facebook Lives that are manual digitizers, you know how to punch a design, and certainly that is the more precise way to do things. So if you already have those skills, you will just apply what you know to get the end result of creating the butterfly shape. Now I have one more thing I want to do to this line. So I'm going to select it in that film strip again and go over here, and there are tools for editing the line. Draw and Paint is a very powerful package. I absolutely love it, and I use it almost every single time I do the software because a lot of what I do is digitizing. So I'm going to go into Delete Points, and I have all these extra little points that form antenna. And I'm having to click them twice because most of them have 2 points, one on top of the other. So when you delete the first one, it looks like there's still one there. So I'm just going around. Notice how my cursor has that little minus sign. So when I get over a point I can delete, that minus sign pops up. And I'm going to take the antenna off because I do not want skinny lines sticking up like that over the top of my lace. It would not be well supported. If I wanted antenna on this design, I would integrate it into my digitizing as a technique, as part of the digitizing. So if you're kind of a beginning digitizer or have low to intermediate level skills, if you use the steps in today's software, you should be able to create your own basic lace butterfly at a basic level. and that's a good place to start. All digitizing and creating lace are skills. They're acquired. They take some exploring. They take some making something that's really bad and going, oh my, that didn't work. How can I change it? And honestly, this process is what I go through every single time I digitize an embroidery design, because I never know for sure what the end result of something is going to be. So getting in here, doing trial and error, and playing with the tools once you learn what they do, that's what you need to do to learn and grow your skills. Now my line is still selected, and I'm looking over here at the line settings, and it's only 0.5 millimeter. I'm going to use a quick tool. I know that it will pick up better if I increase the line to 1 millimeter. Now you'll see that it expanded and is wider, and it's just perfect. So I'm ready to close my draw and paint. And because I'm linked from digitizing, it's going to bring that artwork right back with me. And I'm now ready to start digitizing my butterfly. Now, if somebody had asked me to digitize a lace butterfly for them, I would manually punch everything and plan my steps. But it is possible to use the quick tools and also successfully create a butterfly. The difference will be in the level of precision of the finished design. And overall, for what we're doing today, 99 out of 100 people would not notice that difference between the quick tool and the manual punch digitizing. But if you're a person who's experienced and that's what you love to do, then by all means, follow your own brain in digitizing this butterfly. So what I did was I went to the Quick Create tab in Digitizing, and I set my pattern fill to a crosshatch fill, and that's what we use for lace. And we talked about that the last time I did a Facebook Live, which was on lace. And then set your line border to whatever type of line you want this to border. Satin line is going to be the best for inset lace or some sort of a thicker motif line stitch, like maybe little pictogram shapes or something like that. Because when you're putting this lace into fabric, you want enough width in those stitches to bite into the fabric when the opening is all cut out. And that is where probably the biggest challenge lies with a technique like this is, I remember the first few times I did this when our software advanced to a level, because I've been with this software since DOS days, that we could actually do things like this. And the first time I did it, you even had to take scissors and cut the opening out. We didn't have the Cutwork needles. But the very first one I made pulled away in 6 places, and I had these big gaps where the fabric had frayed. I didn't have my settings set the way they needed to be. So some of the things I'm showing you today are an accumulation of things that I have learned over many, many years. So I'm going to use the satin line, and then I'm going to enable applique just by clicking the top of it, because the bottom half of that applique button does enable it, but it also opens it for you to do settings, and we don't need to do that yet. Then I'm going to go over to where it says fill area and line in the options. And in fill area and line options, I'm going to set up the options for the crosshatch fill so that there is less space. There's less gaps between the lines of the stitches. Now, the ones that I stitched for my samples today, I made them fabric-like because I wanted them to be sturdy enough to wear or to use. So I took that setting all the way down to a 1.3. But I have some other samples I'll show you at the end where the spacing on the line was much wider than 1.3. And I used a bit heavier thread, and it still holds up just fine. So I've got some other tips and techniques I'll give you guys at the end as well. So 1.3, you can actually take this all the way down to a 1 millimeter gap, and then it looks almost like fabric. Then your stitch type is going to be a double zigzag, and you want the style to either be most likely diamond or square. So diamond just sort of sets the lines on point, and square makes them go across and up and down, and that's a personal choice. You could do whichever you prefer. I never mess with the stitch length or the zigzag width, because on this particular stitch, it does a straight stitch out and it zigzags lightly back over it to make it strong and to make it plumper so it looks like lace. So all of that is programmed in. Then I am going to go to the line settings, and I do not recommend inset lace with a satin stitch any narrower than 4 millimeters. You need at least 4 millimeters of width to be able to cover the cut edge and to catch that crosshatch fill stitch that we're going to drop into it. So 4 millimeter or wider, and density normally 4, but I'm going to be using a low density setting in this satin stitch to show you some things as I change settings. So I'm going to set my density at 15. Borderline needs to be closed. And then I'm going to use a contrasting color change, and that's going to add a second thread color to my color number 1. You can see color number 1 over here, but they will be tied together until I later break these apart. So I'm going to insert a color change, and I'm going to choose something wildly funky, because you can always change your colors later to something else. So we'll do hot pink. And that color change, again, is just going to make it easier for you to visualize, to see as I make adjustments to a margin setting for the applique feature. You'll be able to see the lines of stitches as they move in and out at different settings. Then I'm going to go to the applique tab, and I'm going to use standard applique. I could use pre-cut piece, which is designed for cutting, stopping to cut a hole out and then going ahead and stitching without anything in the hole. But I'm just going to use standard applique as a starting point, and I'm going to break them apart and pick and choose the pieces I want to use. So standard applique works just fine for this. I don't need to worry about applique piece margin and match placement line yet, because after I create the butterfly and then I'm going to copy and paste it to make a second butterfly, we're going to come back in and make the first applique one setting and the second applique another setting. And that's going to move the lines of running stitches that we can use as stabilizing stitches and cutwork needle stitches. So just keep that in the back of your mind. If it sounds like Greek to you, don't worry about it, because as we go through this and you see it, I think it will make sense. It was something new. I had not tried doing this with 2 appliques, identical ones before, and then changing them so that one of them was optimized to be my stabilizing stitch and the second one was optimized to be my cutwork needle stitch. And I can't believe I hadn't done it before, because it made things run so smooth. I was telling Amy that those samples I showed you were my first stitch outs, and I did not have to tweak anything because the lines were right where I wanted them to be. So it was really, really cool. So I'm going to go ahead and just click OK to close this out. Remember, we're going to edit things later as we work our way through this. And now we're ready to digitize the lace section. And this is where I told you, if you're a manual digitizer and you want to manual punch this, go right ahead. Make that lace any way you want it to be, but make sure your applique layer is standard applique. And then once you get it digitized, all the steps are going to be the same. So I'm just going to use Quick Create and Quick Stitch, and I'm going to cursor. You'll notice it says you can't do that here. I'm going to cursor over this outer line. Those of you who are old enough to remember Ghostbusters, that's the Ghostbuster symbol. I'm going to cursor over this outer line until I see the little star and click in it. And it's going to come up with a little red and green dotted or dashed line for color tolerance. It looks fine. It's on the outer edge of that line. That's where I want it to be. Remember, what we're going to make is a crosshatch fill with a satin line and applique. So I'll go ahead and click OK here. Now I have a lace butterfly. So part of the reason for doing it this way is if you're kind of a beginner, this is a quick way when you have nice, clean artwork like we started with to get a design and to experience the success of making your own lace. Now, this is maybe not something that you would put on Marketplace and sell for $500, but by the same token, on the back of my jacket, when I'm walking through the mall, I'm pretty sure somebody's going to stop me and say, "Where did you get that jacket? I want one with lace like that on the back of mine." So have at it and have a little fun with it. Now, I am still in my software, my Quick Create. I can tell that because my cursor says don't click here. So I'm just going to right click to release it. Then I'm coming to the film strip, making sure that crosshatch fill applique is selected. I'm going to right click over it. And we have two choices for making another butterfly from this film strip. Duplicate would seem like one click answer, but duplicate is designed to offset what we copy and paste in with duplicate. And so it's easy to select it and move it around. Think like you're making flower petals that are all the same, and you want to be able to select that second petal and move it easily. So what we need to do is use copy and then right click again and paste. And now I have two crosshatch fill applique butterflies that are absolutely identical. And we're going to manipulate each one of these separately and then go back and break them apart and pick and choose the pieces we need to finish out our applique. Is this the only way to do this? Absolutely not. It's just a technique that I came up with while I was playing around with laces. It's easy to do. It's made for successful embroidery. I'm sure many, many other people out there have done this other ways and it worked for them. So learn all the ways there are to do it and then pick and choose and use what helps you. So to make this easier, I did not want them both the same color. So I select the first one, right click over it, and insert color change. And again, I'm going to use just kind of a wild, funky color. We'll do a really strong yellow here. And now if I look over at my design panel, I have color 1, which is actually 2 color stops, right? That applique, the satin line stitch I made, I added a second color change for the satin line, and color 2 with that same pink color. So I want to play with just the first applique. The easiest way to do that is to come over to Design Panel, uncheck Color 2. It disappears from view. It's still there, but it's hidden. And now I can clearly see all the pieces, parts of my second applique. And I'm going to zoom in on a wing up here, and I'm using the Zoom to Rectangle tool, but you can zoom many different ways. You can zoom using the slider or by percentage. I want you to be able to see when I start manipulating this, how these lines change in here when I start adjusting settings within this applique embroidery. And to make it even easier, I'm going to go to the View tab and change this to a 2D view. In 3D view, it plumps up the thread and adds shadows and highlights to make it look realistic. In 2D view, it looks plain. You see the stitch points, but it just looks like somebody took a pencil and drew it. And this is what I'm talking about. Had you manually punched this, were you an expert digitizer and you manually punched this, you wouldn't see so many little ins and outs that came from the original lines, which were not quite perfect. But honestly, once I stitched this on my fabric, I didn't even notice it anymore. The other thing you might want to do is adjust this edit background setting. This slider dims and brightens the background artwork. So I'm going to dim that down so we can definitely tell the background artwork is still there, but we can see this is a stitching line. This is the artwork. So this is where we want to be to observe how the changes in settings work. Now, we still have this one design visible. I'm going to select it in the film strip, and I'm going to right-click over it and go to Properties because I only want to change this one applique piece for now. And in the Properties, if you go to the Applique tab, and in the Applique tab, you have still your standard applique piece chosen. Now, this is something that is a little faster to do in Windows than it is in Mac, because in Windows, we can make this change and then click apply and we'll see it update automatically. In Mac, you make that change and you have to click OK and see where the line is, and then you have to open this window again. You can do it, just takes a few more steps. So I am going to play around with the applique piece margin. And in the applique piece margin, I want it to match the placement line. And then I want to start changing where this placement line, this running stitch right here, is going to locate itself. Now, these two lines here, those are, I had underlay turned on in the satin stitch. So these are underlay. And I left it on because it helps stabilize that cut edge even more just before it does the satin stitch. Again, it's a personal choice, but that's why you see them. That's why you're there. We're looking at this blue line and we want to push it out so that it's stitching about where the underlay is in this pink line of stitches. So I'm going to increase to 1.4 and then click apply. And do you see how that blue line pushed out at 1.4 millimeters from the placement line, which is the center of the stitches for my applique, and it's now going to be exactly the same location as where the underlay, the stabilizing stitches for the satin stitch are. So that means when I stitch my first layer of the embroidery, it's going to stitch so it's inside the outer edge of the satin stitch, but still close enough to the outer edge of the satin stitch to really help make my cut edge stay stable and secure. So that was step one. Match placement line is on. Now, when you're doing this as trial and error for yourself, we started at a 1.0, and that line was actually in here. I'm going to take it to 1.1 and apply. See how it moved out some, but not far enough. 1.2 and apply. 1.3 and apply. 1.4 is going to be just where I want to be. So it's not rocket science, but by the same token, you have to know the tools, and somebody probably needs to show you or teach you what they're capable of and how they work. I thank Phil Carlton because he showed me this little trick for opening up the density in these satin stitches so I could see through it. He was the one that came up with it originally. There is nothing new under the sun. We all borrow and share ideas from each other, but I give him credit because he was the one who figured it out first. So now I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to hide this embroidery and check on the second applique. And this one, we want to bring this line of stitches in so that we can cut, and we want that fabric to cut just about where this inner line of stabilizing stitches are for that pink border, so that it doesn't cut the fabric too far out here so that we get little what's the word I want? Little fuzzies, little tufties, pokies. That's the word we always use for it. We don't get little pokies showing out of our satin stitch, but it leaves the maximum amount of fabric to be covered by the satin stitch so that it makes that edge really secure. So we're going to, again, select our applique. We're going to right click over it and go to the properties because that is just the selected design. And this one, when we go to applique, you can see it's at applique piece margin is at 1. We're going to match the placement line and apply. And that pops that placement line out farther. Then we're going to make this, we want to draw this in. So I'm going to draw this in by going to negative numbers. When you get below 0, 0 is always going to be the center run between the two outer edges of the satin stitch. Here's a -3. See how it brought that in, but not far enough. Let's try, whoops, other way. -6. Now it's coming in further. -7, 8. Now it's coming in further. So we're just going to take this down, and the number I found that worked for me was -1.8. So if you had trouble with math in school, this is kind of like when you used to work graphs, and graphs had positive sides and negative sides. Well, this little line has a positive side and a negative side when you use applique piece margin and match placement line. So now that's maybe, that might be, I might go back to 1.7 and apply. And now that is going to do a cutwork needle line right where the edge of that fabric is going to get the stabilizing stitch for the satin. But remember, somewhere in between here, we're going to end up with a crosshatch mesh of lace, and we're going to adjust it so it will attach itself all the way out towards the edge of the satin stitch, and that's going to bind everything together. Okay, so now I am ready to show both of these embroidery designs. And when you have them both showing, the underneath one kind of disappears from view because the stitches are right on top of each other. The reason I chose to use 2 designs is because I could adjust the first one to get my line out here that I needed for securing the fabric before I ever started cutting a hole in it. And this one, so that when I made a cutwork needle, it would cut the fabric in towards the inner edge of the satin line of stitches so that all of this would become open so I could stitch my lace mesh over more stabilizer and create those beautiful inset lace designs. Amy, do you have any questions or comments up to this point?
I don't have any questions showing. So
Okay.
anyone, if you've got questions, pop them in the chat.
Yep, be more than happy. And we'll hopefully have a little time left at the end if you have some questions at the end as well. So now I've got both my colors visible again. I'm going to select both of them, and I can do that any number of ways, but Control A selects everything, Command A in Mac. And then I'm going to go to the Edit tab and use this handy dandy tool called Break Apart. And once I click this in the film strip, you're going to see all the individual pieces from both of those appliques. And it's way more pieces, parts than we need, but we're going to pick and choose, and we're going to rebuild this design with the things that we need to create our embroidery. Now, one thing I will warn you is, I'm going to right click and get rid of that zoom tool showing there, is if something isn't quite the way you want it to be, like in your original design, you want it to smooth out and edit this, do that before you copy and paste in a second design, because there's no reason to edit 2 designs. Get the first one perfect and then do your copying and pasting then. If there are changes you need in the applique, do it before you break apart, because once you break it apart, it's like Humpty Dumpty. You can't put it back together again. And then you're going to be individually editing hundreds and hundreds of little points that define the shaping of the stitch objects within this. So keep those two things in mind when you start making these designs. Part of the reason that I used two designs as well, because I have done this technique many times in the past using a square or a circle or a simple triangle, something like that. Those you can copy and paste the pieces and adjust the sizes larger and smaller, and they scale appropriately. With something complex like this butterfly shape, when you start copying and pasting, say, a running stitch and then trying to scale it larger or smaller, for whatever reason, and I'm sure it's geometrics and math that I don't understand very well, there are some points that will scale differently, and you'll end up doing a lot of selecting those points and editing them to tweak them. So using the two butterflies was by far the most accurate and the fastest way that I have found. All right, so I've broken this apart, and whenever you break something apart, you'll end up, when you have a two-color applique like this, and you break it apart, you end up with a redundant first color. I do not know why it does that, but it is consistent, and it only happens at the end of that first applique. So this one's redundant. If it bothers you to see it in there, select it, right-click, and delete it. No big deal. Then I am going to think, and I'm going to zoom to fit so you can see the big picture here. What steps do I anticipate that I would need for stitching this lace butterfly? And I'll tell you, when I was writing up my notes for this, I skipped a step. I missed a step. I didn't anticipate a step, but as soon as I started stitching it out, it was like, oh yeah, I should have. So it's okay. You can add pieces to a certain degree back in as well, but try and make yourself a plan. I know that I need a marker stitch because that marker stitch is going to come around and secure the fabric so that when I do a cutwork needle hole in it, it will keep it from stretching. So the second thing I'm going to need is a cutwork needle line, and I want to cut towards this inner edge, right? So that's why we made that second butterfly and adjusted it so that line of stitches with the placement line in the margin moved inward, closer to the inner edge of the satin stitches. We're going to need a baste to add additional stabilizer, because I guarantee you, if you do not put 4 to 6 to 8 layers of extra stabilizer under that cut hole and then stitch it in with a basting stitch, it's going to stretch or shrink, and it will pull your registration off, and you'll have a butterfly that was like my very first one. It wasn't always attached at the edges, and after you stitch for 4 hours, that's a very frustrating experience. I discovered that I also needed another one of that first tack down stitch, because once I slid the lace underneath this butterfly, or the extra wash away, there were some places where the butterfly is floating free inside that basting box. It needed to be stitched back down and secured to the new layer of stabilizer, so I didn't get that push and pull of the needle and the stitches as it was stitching in the lace mesh. Then we want to stitch our lace. Then we want to stitch our border. And I'm just making myself a little note here, so bear with me. So those are the pieces, parts that I want to stack up in my film strip, and everything I don't use, I'm just going to delete and get rid of. By the way, I don't know how many of you know this, but there is a clipboard. In Windows, there's a clipboard viewer. In Mac, there's not, because of the differences in the operating system. a viewer does not work with the Mac clipboard. It's programmed differently somehow. But if you have Windows open and you see this clipboard viewer and it bothers you, all you have to do is left click on it and it goes away. It clears the clipboard. So just gets it out of your way. Now, I'm going to start playing with this, and I want to be able to see the stitch objects very clearly. So if I come down here, or in Mac, it's in the top toolbar, and choose this little tool that says Edit Points, and then I select a stitch object, it shows up with all the points that make the stitch object. So it makes them easier to see. And I want to choose the first object to be that securing stitch or tack down stitch. And it's the one that I want to be towards the outer edge. So this one is going to be my first piece, and it can just stay in place. Then I want to find a running stitch line that is at the inner edge of the satin stitch. And I know that's in the second applique right down here. So here it is. And that's where I want to cut with my Cutwork needle. And for those of you who have done some things like this before, does that make sense to you now why I decided using 2 copies of the butterfly was easier? Because I could use that applique piece margin and adjust it to positive and negative numbers to get the 2 lines that I needed. So I know this one, I want to be my running stitch line or my Cutwork needle line. So I'm just going to move it in the film strip. I'm going to click and drag it up, and its little black indicator line in the film strip says it's going to drop right here. So now I have the securing stitch and I have the Cutwork needle stitch, but this is not Cutwork needle yet. Now, by the way, the only place you can do Cutwork needle is in Digitizing. The Cutwork needle command shows up in the thread color change box in all of the different modules or applications of the software, but it only actually activates the very short cutting length and the pop-up on your embroidery machine if you change it to Cutwork needle in Digitizing. So Digitizing is required to make Cutwork needle designs. Then I'm going to right-click over this running stitch and select just the properties for that one running stitch. And voila, there it is right there. Create Cutwork needle line. It presets the stitch length to a very short one that was determined long, long ago when this was first added, that it cuts properly with the Cutwork needles. You have your choice of 2 Cutwork needles or 4. 2 Cutwork needles are generally used when you want to cut a hole, but you don't care if the hole is super, super smooth. 2 Cutwork needles cuts a lot faster. That's what I used, and it cut fine. Amy, can you flip-flop over for a second? This is what it cut out. Look how nice and smooth that edge is. So 2 Cutwork needles. Thank you, dear. You can go back to the software. And I like to include secure points. Now, what secure points do, and I can still remember my Swedish friends at the convention where they taught us how to do Cutwork needles, saying we quickly learned it needed to be secured in a few spots where it skipped cutting or it sucked that fabric right down into the bobbin case. Not a happy moment. But I did make mine like 100 millimeters long because this is a big enough design. It can go quite a ways before it skips a thread and jumps over and starts cutting again. So that's what secure points does. And now I'm all set up. I'm going to click OK. And if you look at the film strip, that little border at the edge of the film strip changed from a standard indicator of color to the Cutwork needle indicator. And that's whenever you see that, that means that particular object stitches as a Cutwork needle. And when it is exported, it will know to pop up on your embroidery machine and say, hey, put in a Cutwork needle, use the red. Hey, put in a Cutwork needle, use the yellow, and you're good to go. All right. Now, I am going to put a stop or leave a stop here because we're going to put a basting box all the way around this to hold extra layers of stabilizer to sort of stop the gap in that hole. And we're going to use wash away. I like the fabric style wash aways. I don't know what our current branding name is. In the old days it was Aqua Magic, basically, but it's the fabric looking wash away stabilizer. So I'm going to use this stop. I'm going to select it, right click over that stop, and choose properties, and I can program what the stop says. So it says place applique fabric now. Well, we don't have applique fabric, but I'm going to use place layers. Oops, got to be able to type, don't you? Layers of wash away under hoop. Now this will not pop up on my sewing and embroidery machine. Even our branded machines do not have that capability, at least not yet. But if I go to File and print the guide, and it has a color list in it at the end of the guide, the template guide, it will say where that stop sign pops up in the thread color list, it will show you what you have typed in there. So you can actually print just that page and use it like a little guide for the step-by-steps to this embroidery. Then I want to make sure that the stop is selected because I'm going to insert a basting box. And there are 11 ways you could do this, but the fastest and easiest one for me, I'm going to zoom to fit here and go back to Quick Create, is just use a shape. So I want to set up with no pattern fill. And if I click the top of that little option, it deactivates. I want my line stitch. So I'm going to click the satin that's there and choose running stitch. And I want applique to be off. So again, toggle it on and off in the top half of that little button. And then I'm going to go to the fill area and line, and I'm going to increase the stitch length to 12, which is a very long basting stitch, which will be easy to pick out later. And then when I make my shape box, it will be a long basting stitch. So we're going to select the square shape, although you could use a circle or whatever. The circle would, in order to get it all the way around the butterfly, hang out the top and side. So obviously not a good choice, but you're not limited to just a square. And then I'm going to click shape, and it makes the shape too small. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift. I think on Mac it is Option and Shift or Command and Shift. You have to try it out if you have a Mac and see. I'm not right where I can test it. And now I have a square running stitch of basting stitches. So it's going to tell me a halt has been requested with the stop. And then I'll know the basting stitch is next. So that will prompt me to remember to slide my I wish you could see my hands. I'm sliding stabilizer under the hoop. And we'll talk at the end about some tips about that as well. Now, I want to stitch an additional running stitch like the tack down stitch, but I want it to be at a long, actually I want it to be at a standard stitch length. So I'm going to sneak back up here in the film strip and select that running stitch. That's the one that we stitched at the very beginning on the fabric to strengthen our fabric. And I'm going to right click and copy it. But I want to do that after I baste the extra stabilizer to hold all these little flappy loose pieces down so that when I start stitching all that lace, it's going to not shift on me. So I'm going to come back down to the running stitch in the film strip, right click and paste it into that location. Now, if I'd gotten it pasted in the wrong place, is it a big deal? No, because I just select it, click it, and drag it where it needs to be. So remember with your film strip, too often I see people in classes that they delete things or they undo things and do it all over again, when a simple matter of moving something up and down the film strip would be faster and perhaps more effective. All right. Now, I want a new color change in here as well, so that the machine will stop between the running stitch basting line and this where it tacks down for the beginning of the stitching the body. And that's just a convenience thing for me. So the machine will stop and not just run all the way through the design like, you know, you turned your stop sign off on the embroidery machine. So I'm going to take this running stitch, make sure it's selected, right click over it, insert a color change, and I'm going to use a blue, but a blue that's a different shade than my original blue. So now it's going to tack it down. It's going to Cutwork needle. It's going to stop so I can put stabilizer. It's going to baste around the outside, and it's going to, whoops, I put my color in the wrong place, didn't I? So what I'm going to do is move this color up one. So the color change comes up after running the baste. And then I'll know that the next thing it's going to do is start the stitches that are actually for the butterfly. And again, this is kind of a personal preference thing. You could have the color change after that. It would be perfectly fine. It's whatever makes sense to you when you're going to stitch this out in the sequence of designing. Okay, so the next thing we need is lace, because we've stopped. We know we're going to do a running stitch, and then we're going to do lace. So I need a crosshatch fill, right? And it probably doesn't matter which of the crosshatch fills I use, because, and I'll show you why here in a second. So I want to stitch this one. I know I'm not going to need that applique piece, but we'll take care of it in a minute. I'm going to come down here and grab this crosshatch fill, click and drag it up so it will start stitching the crosshatch after the baste, and then securing this edge, this cut edge, back to the new stabilizer. Now you might find you want another color change in between those two. It's whatever makes sense to you. But what you will find is, and I'm going to go back here to the point or edit points tool, is that this is the one place where you have to do some manual adjusting, because it's only going to bring the lace in halfway. And there is nothing in our system that I could do to adjust it as part of the applique to bring that out any further, because the pattern fill is set to go halfway under the border line. So this is where you have to come in and you have to start dragging these points out. And I know it's going to be like watching paint dry for you guys, so I probably won't do all of them, but just know that you would go all the way around this and you would click and drag in edit points mode and move these points. And I want them so that lace is coming out almost all the way to that securing line, or even all the way to that securing line. And that's going to mean that when this stitches out, it's going to give you a lot more attachment of the lace to the remaining fabric, because remember, we cut the fabric here. Satin stitch is going to go over the cut edge of the fabric, but oops, and I didn't hold my shift key to keep that square. So when you move them, click and drag makes them round, and when you want a square one, shift click and drag makes them square. So I would go all the way around this, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. This one's square, so I'm going to click it and make it round. That was just the start and stop point, and they're always square. I don't know why they're programmed to be that way. I cannot answer. I was not a programmer who wrote code for this software. So I think that's enough for you guys to see that you do need to adjust that lace outward. And it's the only really manual thing that I found I had to do when I used the quick tools to make this design. Now, so we have a crosshatch fill, and we'll pretend that we went all the way around that and adjusted it to make it enough larger to sit out on top of that stabilizing line. The edge of that lace is going to bite into this fabric better, but not poke out the other side. We do not need an applique piece or a double stitch or a stop, but we do need a satin line to be our border. And we want that to stitch after the crosshatch fill. So you could either bring the satin line up and put it here, or you could select both the satin line and its color change if you want to have the option of making that border a different color. And again, it's one of those things that you're in control of the design. I think oftentimes when we create lessons and we teach them to people, or we provide written lessons to people, they learn what they can do step by step, but it does not take you that step beyond here's what I know how to do to how can I take the things I learned today and use them in another place. And that is application. That is actually taking that next step into transfer of knowledge from the academic, what do I know, to the metaphysical, what can I do with what I've learned today? And that's where we'd like you to go. That's where we'd like you to be. So now I have all these extra pieces I know I don't need. I'm going to scroll down after I select the first one, shift and click and delete them. And now if I go back to the View tab and 3D View, and I am going to select this satin line again in the film strip. Had my zoom tool on. Come on, satin line. I hope I haven't locked up here, Amy. I'm going to minimize this and maximize it again. Sometimes, there it goes. And then right click over it. Sometimes when you're presenting like that, there's a lag. And that's what was happening. I'm going to open the properties for that satin line. Remember, we made this a 15 so we could see through it, so we could easily see where things were and manipulate them. I'm going to take it back down to a 4, which turned out to be a good setting. I used YLI cotton thread on the one I stitched. If I was doing this for, say, curtains, I might have set the spacing in my fabric, the lace part of my fabric, to a bigger number, like maybe a 2 or a 2.3 or 4, so there would be more space between this, and used a little bit thicker thread because it wouldn't get the stress that you're going to get from wearing it in a jacket. So those, again, are the kinds of things that I'm hoping you guys will experiment with and play with as you use this technique. And this is a good place to use Live View. Live View, I reset all my applications, so I have to open my Live View window back up. But in Live View, you can kind of skim around that edge and make sure that you didn't adjust your lace so that it's poking out the edge anywhere. Live View is a really great tool if you're not in the habit of using it. You can also see how dense that lace mesh is. And those are all things you can go back and edit quite easily. So you would want to use your save or save as and make a working file, which is an EDO file. And then you would want to export it so you can stitch it later. Or if your embroidery machine is on, you can send direct to machine, or you can send it to your cloud. Now, a few people, I've seen some posts on some chat groups that things are not sending to the cloud, but I find there is a bit of a lag. So if I send something to the cloud, sometimes it takes a few minutes for it to populate once I click the folder on my machine. and appear there. So sometimes when you think it's not going to the cloud, it probably is, but it just is not communicating real quickly. And if you're in a big hurry, there's always a USB stick. So those are some of your options there. And test, 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 test. Make yourself a small piece of lace. Make something 3 by 3 inches, a simple shape, a circle, a square, something basic if you've never done this before, and then stitch it out. And you will learn so much about working with attaching lace pieces into a fabric. Now, I do have some other tips. You need to stiffen the fabric. I used, you can use sizing, like spray sizing. You can use spray starch. You can use dip starch if you are a person who starches clothes. I used an embroidery spritz-on stabilizer that you spritz on, let it dry part way, and then iron it. All of those work, but you need that fabric that you're going to cut into to be stiff. The stiffener kind of binds the fibers together and it minimizes the amount of scrunching you get from that push and pull of the needle as the hoop works back and forth when you're stitching these big long runs of crosshatch stitches for the design. When you're putting extra fabric underneath, I found no less than 4 layers. And if it's a large design and really stitch intensive, use 6, use 8. You probably have to soak it a while to get it all out of the lace at the end. And it does need to be something that can be wetted to do that. But once you get it soaked out, you'll find that if you don't have enough stabilizer and you don't have your fabric stiffened enough, that's when you'll get problems in registration, so that it doesn't bind well to the edge of the fabric and it pulls loose. And I've had that happen in my learning curves. Very frustrating. That's why I always do a test stitch of something on the type of fabric that I'm going to use. That's why with that linen jacket, I made darn sure that I had everything lined up and right, because linen is ravelly. And that particular jacket is very ravelly. You're going to use the same thread type and weight and in both top and bobbin when you stitch lace. And you're going to have to tighten that top tension up. I went from, I think a 3 was the default that popped up on my embroidery machine. I went all the way up to a 4. And it balanced those stitches front and back so I didn't have little loopies on the back side. Our embroidery machines are designed to let the top thread pull slightly to the back so that you don't get bobbin thread showing on the top. For lace, you want it to be balanced. So that's why the same thread, same color thread, both bobbin and top, and then tighten your top tension. A large eye embroidery or quilting needle. When you're cut the fabric opening with your Cutwork needles, make sure you have plenty of stabilizer under there, and then make sure you have that extra securing stitch to hold them down if they're kind of irregular pieces and the fabric is in and just kind of laying there loose inside where that basting stitch is. So I have a couple of other samples, Amy, if you want to switch back over. This one again is the butterfly, and I'm going to try to show you how cool is that it caught the edge of that fabric and stitched. Now this still has the wash away in it. You can see the basting stitches there. Here's the back side. I think this is just amazing. Other than a few things I need to trim, it really just looks as good on the back as it does on the front. So I could see doing lace curtains or something pretty like that you could hang in a window. This is something that I made for a friend for a 50th wedding anniversary, and this was just my sample stitch out. But look at this lace. 50 years. The letters are just plain letters inserted in the digitizing program and stitched over the top of the lace. I used a larger gap in that lace setting on this one. So instead of a 1.3, it's probably a 2 or a 2.2. and then a satin border around the outside edge. This one is another inset lace, and I absolutely love this one. It's done with a very soft rayon thread. And for this one, where I did the crosshatch fill, I copied and pasted another one right below it and changed that second fill to a motif fill and used a very open motif. And that's how you get that cool, oops, down a little, Janie, that cool look. Isn't that neat? I just absolutely love it. And this is the one you saw in the ad that they sent out. And it's just a little snowflake. I can't see it. There it is. A little snowflake. And I think that's even the wrong side, but that's done on a linen as well. So any questions, comments?
I don't have any comments or questions from the audience. Just a lot of thank yous. That was great, Janie.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you all for coming today. I know this is a very specialized technique, but I hope some of you take some time to play with it and have some fun. And I want to wish you guys all a happy holiday season, whatever your holidays may be.